Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Our guest in studio is Dr. Sanam Hafeez. She's a New York-based licensed clinical psychologist, teaching faculty member at the very prestigious Columbia University Teachers College, and the founder and clinical director of Comprehensive Consultation Psychological Services. And she's here today as a returning guest to talk with us about, dealing with some of this post-election stress and how social media is definitely fueling the fire when it comes to some of the anxiety associated with the election and some of the other things that are going on nationally and globally. Welcome to the program, Dr. Hafeez.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the election is over. Our president-elect here in the United States is about to have his inauguration ceremony. Do you think that we can breathe now, or are we still in the throes of this huge anxiety-laden election?
We discussed PTSD in another segment, and this is what sort of differentiates PTSD from something we used to call acute stress disorder, which basically was the length of time that you experienced the symptoms for. And so I can tell you that those symptoms, for most of us, of the election that we weren't happy with, the people who weren't happy with the results, they subsided within 2 or 3 weeks. And those people aren't thrilled about it, but for the most part, the intense anxiety, the grief, the misery, the crying, the real, true feeling of depression and anxiety has something to be excited with, again, what sets it apart from PTSD. PTSD doesn't go away that quickly. But now, what happens is that as opposed to something traumatic that happens and now you just have to, get past it, for those people, this is a 4-year journey. So every time something happens, you almost relive it. So now that we're building back up to the inauguration, there is a sort of like a rebirth of those emotions. And every time, and the media obviously, is thriving on this. So when you go online or you turn on the TV, there's all this information, there's all this news that makes you feel vindicated, or it makes you feel, aha, see, I knew it, or, whatever the case may be. And it sort of starts this cycle all over again. So the PTSD, or whatever you want to call it, is kind of going through these ups and downs. It's on a curve, really.
Well, from a collective standpoint, let's talk about this collective PTSD. Now, in your practice, if you're dealing with someone who's had a traumatic experience, or they're going through a bad breakup, or something has happened on social media, maybe bullying or something like that, normally they're not the only one who's affected. Their family member may be affected. A spouse may be affected. Do you offer advice on how to help the family members of the person that's affected, or do you just bring everyone in? Because we can't bring everyone in collectively, especially when it comes to the stress of something like an election.
Right. So, I try to have a top-down approach. So the person who's directly impacted by something is the first one you address. Let's say there's a child involved who's lost a parent. You deal with the child first. Not to say that the remaining or the surviving parent isn't suffering. That parent needs help, because if that child's going to get better, the one parent he or she has needs to get better, right? But the first person, it's almost like when you're on a plane, women and children first, that sort of thing. So you do what's absolutely necessary first. And after things start to get better, then you can incorporate other aspects of their life, whether it's a spouse, a girlfriend, boyfriend, a child, a sibling, a parent. And you say, all right, let's bring this in, because that support system is going to be critical in helping this person really recover. And the same goes for PTSD or any kind of traumatic event.
Do you find that there's sometimes a challenge disconnecting from social media or media in general, because you have a person who has a sense that they don't have their own opinion anymore? Everything that they think is given to them from someone else, yet somewhere in there's their own opinion that's kind of gnawing at the back of their head, but they feel obligated to jump on the bandwagon.
I absolutely feel that way, especially about the younger people. I think that people don't really have the luxury of making up their mind anymore. Before you have a chance to really settle on one side or decide, how you feel about a topic or an issue, conflicting information is literally around the corner, and it'll come out before you've even had time to digest the first piece of it. So, unless you feel very, very strongly and you've always been this very left-wing person, or you're very conservative and you're very staunch and very rooted in your belief system, the younger people who are still sort of deciding who they are as people, this constant stream of information is unsettling because it doesn't give you a chance to truly absorb and process it before you have to deal with the new, barrage of information. And so what happens with that is that people can't really decide or really sort of analyze the information and say, well, how do I feel about it? How does this fit in with my value system?
Do you find that you're seeing patients that are experiencing physical aspects of this anxiety? The mind does control the body. So you've got this anxiety from whatever situation, and it's manifesting in a physical way.
Well, that's a very common thing. And it's not just a somatic, you get anxious and that's why you have all these, physical complaints. There is a real neurological connection between anxiety, or the neural pathway of anxiety, and some things that happen in our body. The people who get an upset stomach when they're upset, when they're anxious, or when they're worried. That's a real thing. The same sort of neural pathways impact the GI tract. And over time, if unchecked, that anxiety, that those things can become a chronic symptom. IBS, for instance, irritable bowel syndrome, even Crohn's disease, is very highly impacted by stress. The triggers of stress can lead to flares. So an average, sort of an easy, laid-back, happy-go-lucky kind of guy is going to be able to take that news in stride and say, all right, oh, well, what can you do about it, right? That's the world we live in. Because that's his or her temperament. A person who's prone to anxiety will see any of that news and react to it in a poor fashion, because that's just the way they're wired. So you have to take your own wiring into account. If you're just an anxiously predisposed person, then you really have to take these, news stories or whatever is out there in small dosages, because you need to understand that your body or your mind is too invested and can actually be impacted by it. If there's a person who can easily just let it roll off their back, great. But if you're not, then take the measures to protect yourself.
How significant is the source of, for lack of a better term, bad news or news that causes anxiety or a situation? I guess if a person is coming to you and they have anxiety because they've been reading the paper or because they talk to a friend as opposed to trolling the internet for hours a day, is the information the key, or is how the information is presented the key to stress and anxiety?
I think that's also a huge part of it. I think, some of the more trusted news sources have a matter-of-fact way of presenting the to some degree. They won't make it catastrophic. They won't make it, it is what it is. And even newspapers will have this, bold, catchy headline, which, if someone sees, let's say they're on their way to work and they just see it on the newsstand, and their heartbeat quickens because they're like, oh my God, is that true? And they can't wait to get to their desk and get on the internet, which is probably even worse because the internet also catastrophizes the same information. So it is a huge part of how we deal with the news is where we get it from. The source really has to be, a sound, trusted source. And I think I said this earlier on in another segment, that there was a study about how people very rarely click on the link to an article or look at the source of an article and say, well, does the source have an alternative agenda or an ulterior motive? Is the source a lobbyist? Is the source, a real person? Is it an advertisement rather than a real piece of information or news? So I think we really, even if we're going to be on the social media websites or on the internet, really have to do our due diligence and really read and fact check. Most people don't fact check. So CNN does this fact checking thing, or these websites or these news shows, or they do fact checks, but the average person doesn't do the extra legwork to say, well, let me find out how true it is. And it's not because they don't care, it's because they don't have the time. So that's a piece that sticks with them.
And where can our listeners go and get information about comprehensive consultation psychological services?
They can go to my website at comprehendthemind.com, www.comprehendthemind.com. Everything's on there, yes, sir. And my link to Twitter, which is Comprehend Mind, Instagram, Dr. Sanam Hafeez, and Facebook, Sanam Hafeez and Comprehensive Consultation Psychological Services.
Well, I thank you for coming in today, Doctor.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard, in studio with Dr. Sanam Hafeez, New York-based licensed clinical psychologist and founder and clinical director of Comprehensive Consultation Psychological Services in New York City. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm, and you can subscribe to this podcast